This program is brought to you with support from the U.S. EPA. We're here to present the EFC Network podcast. The Environmental Finance Center Network is a partnership of 12 centers serving 10 EPA regions. The EFCN provides training and technical assistance to small water and wastewater systems. This podcast series has been designed to help system personnel improve technical, managerial, and financial capacity of the utilities and communities they serve.
Hello, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Dawn Nall, and I am a research engineer with the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. And I'm here today to talk with two of my colleagues from the Environmental Finance Center West, Sarah Diefendorf and Elaine McCarty. And we'll be talking to you a little bit today about what we don't know about septic. So Sarah, if you would give a quick introduction, and then Elaine, and then we'll kind of dig right in.
Okay. Thank you, Dawn. And as you said, I'm Sarah Diefendorf with EFC West, although now becoming another name, the Capacity Collaborative. And we have been working across various states in the United States, including Puerto Rico, on septic and other wastewater issues. And septic in particular has presented a lot of challenges and has revealed issues that we really didn't know existed. And so, we want to talk about that today.
Great, thanks. And Elaine?
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much, Dawn. Yeah, I'm Elaine McCarty, Associate Director at Environmental Finance Center West. And the thing I would say about septic and wastewater as Capacity Collaborative, and Sarah just mentioned that we're switching over to that name, we're really working to build capacity within communities. And what we're coming up against and experiencing is a lot of situations where we don't know what we don't know. So there's a lot of need for investigation and digging into the problems that exist.
It's funny that you and I both said we're going to dig in, and everyone likes to dig right into septic tanks, right? So, so we will. I really just want to have you guys share some of your experiences. What do you mean we don't know what we don't know?
Well, I mean, I'll kick it off with some of our work in Alabama. Elaine, maybe you want to talk about Puerto Rico. And then we've got a few other sites as well. But in Alabama, and there was a recent blog that was written about this too in the Coosa River watershed, which people can read on the site. And basically what you've got is some of the most beautiful rivers in this country and a state that's filled with rivers. And at the same time, you have fish camps. And fish camps used to be just sort of sparse and few and far between, where people would basically go in the summer or whatever, and they'd set up their fish camps and they would fish, obviously, that's hence the name. But more and more people are building up on the rivers. And from everything from still a small shack as a fish camp to a mansion. And most of those are going to be on septic. And there is a real true unknown as to whether or not people understand how they're supposed to treat their septic, whether or not they even have septic, whether or not they've put in the right septic system for the size of the space that they're using as a fish camp or as a mansion or whatever. And so it's really on entities like river keepers, like the Coosa River Keeper, to go out and test the water to find out if these septic systems are leaking. And then, of course, what do you do about it? Because it's individuals, right? And so it just becomes very, very difficult to identify, of course, who's got that leaking system and to do something about it. So we don't know what we don't know because we don't know what's leaking into the water. And oftentimes the homeowners, fish camp owners themselves don't know what they don't know. So that's a challenge that we'll be working on in the next couple of years. Elaine?
Yeah, and regarding Puerto Rico, we've just seen a myriad of concerns arise. So when you think about what's going on in the needs in the central mainland Puerto Rican areas where you have many different small water systems that are being managed by different entities, and the effects of similarly not really knowing where septic systems are, not knowing if they're being properly maintained. Many residents don't seem to know if they have a septic system or certainly how to maintain it. And even there's sometimes questions about how well the septic system was built. And then if you carry that forth to the coastal areas of Puerto Rico or even the small islands where you see sort of different issues where they're experiencing sea level rise and climate change effects on both their septic systems and their stormwater, where it's just being even more overburdened by those environmental factors, there's just a lot that we don't know yet.
So how are we going to overcome these challenges of what we don't know? I guess more specifically, how are you going to work with the river keepers folks, Sarah, and the homeowners? And Elaine, how are you going to work with those water entities and the various homeowners, and of course the language barrier and other things that we might face in Puerto Rico? So Sarah, you want to go first?
Yeah, it is a difficult question. Homeowners are a little bit afraid of this too. I mean, they don't want their septic system to be leaking, but they also don't want to have to pay for it if it is leaking, right? And they certainly don't want to be told, oh, you have to replace your entire septic system. And so it becomes a real challenge to figure out how do you address this. Part of it is also it's pretty powerful. The Coosa River Waterkeeper is going out. They have a whole summer program where they go and they test the water for fecal coliform and other things, right? And at least then they can start to build awareness, which is what they do. They post signs that basically say, don't swim here, which of course, it's a big thing, swimming in the river. That's kind of what you do in the summers, go swimming in the rivers. And so they can start to post signs, build awareness. Certainly, while maybe an individual does not want to put the money into replacing their septic or even fixing their septic, they also don't want their children to get sick, right? So it's the first big step towards combating this is building awareness. And then you have to try to figure out, well, okay, so once the awareness is there, what options do people have in order to pay for this? And that's kind of the second step, is finding the funding to help people pay to either fix their system, replace their system, or in some cases, even pumping out their systems. Because a lot of people just don't even have the money for that. And they're just kind of keeping their fingers crossed, that things don't get bad. So it is a challenge.
Yeah, and Sarah, I would just add to that in some cases, it's really uncertain who's even available to do the pumping. So what we've realized, whether it's in Hawaii or Alabama or Puerto Rico, is sometimes the pumping services are unknown. It's not clear, or maybe the pumping services have just not really, they've kind of faded out. And so it's harder and harder for the residents to even access the pumping services. And of course, with that comes increased cost that the residents, the ones who are aware that they need to pump and want to, just have limited access to it. I would also say that, for example, in Vieques, we recognize we need to learn more. We want to find out what the residents do know. So we want to kind of find out from them what service they might be using, how frequently they've been pumping, and other sort of details. So we need to collect a little bit more information and then hopefully connect that information and data to existing organizations and services and nonprofits that are working in different areas of conservation, protection, or even drinking water. So there's a systemic approach to remedying the issues, particularly if contamination is occurring.
Yeah, and I might add with, Elaine mentioned both Hawaii and Puerto Rico, which of course are both islands. If you start a concerted effort to deal with septic or other wastewater issues on islands, then you drive up the need on an island to make the fixes, and there are limited resources, which means the cost goes way up. And that's some of the concerns too, is that if you start this initiative to help people deal with their septic and you don't have the services, or you have just the normal services you would have on the island, getting additional equipment, additional providers, all of that to an island just drives the costs up, sometimes beyond the ability for homeowners to pay.
So when you're working with kind of the remote locations like the Coosa River in Alabama, or places where you're seeing growth in interest population, but not necessarily services, is there a mechanism to try and help start those types of businesses? Or is this one of the what we don't know yet?
Well, yeah, we certainly did hear on Oahu in Hawaii that there's not a whole lot of interest in people signing up to become septic pumpers, right? I mean, it's not exactly a glamorous job. And they actually do have a community college program to help teach people, and they can't get people enrolled. And so that's another question. How do you incentivize people to work in a job that isn't exactly a glamorous job? Yeah, it's I don't know, Elaine, what do you think? Is there another way?
Yeah, and I don't know. That's yet to be seen. Well, the other challenge we see is even with a business entrepreneur who has good intentions and wants to provide a currently unmet service and do it in a way that benefits the community, but also they're a business, makes a profit. The profit margins seem to be very narrow. And so, yeah, it's a very tricky space, especially if you're trying to tackle it from an entrepreneurial space. I don't know that we have the answer to that yet. We know it. We know people are trying.
Yeah.
So as you guys are doing this work and you're learning more and you're gathering the information and you're helping these communities to start to identify what some of the limitations are, will you be producing any resources, or can other communities come back to you guys to learn what you've learned?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're gonna one of the things that we really do have to do is get out there and identify, especially the federal funding sources that are available to communities to address this issue. We should state too that a lot of this is an environmental justice issue. And there is a lot of environmental justice funding out there, so that those communities most affected tend to be communities of color and Native communities as well. And so identifying that funding availability as well is going to be really important. And yeah, we're going to be putting together funding resources. And then sometimes there are state resources, although that varies state by state. And so, yes, and we will continue to write blogs on this and produce material on this, and our website will have updates and all of that. And we're looking forward to digging in. As you said, we don't want to say dig in, but we're going to say dig in.
And one outcome that I hope for is that as we do this work and as we build communications and improve communications, that we're bridging silos that may currently be barriers to effectively tackling these wastewater issues, and making sure that local governments are designing regulations or applying regulations in a way that facilitates the public health departments to work with the nonprofits, to work with the private sector, and share information.
That's a great point, Elaine. I think that we're starting to see a real need for our communities to have the ability to enforce and assist with privately held wastewater systems, because the impact can be so significant. And we're kind of learning that there's a need for ordinance and maybe some other ways to manage individual wastewater systems, the septic tanks. And so will you guys be able to work with the communities if they have interest in something like that?
Absolutely. I mean, community engagement is key, and sort of getting everyone on board to do this. And I think again, it's important to note that when you're dealing with environmental justice, poor, vulnerable communities, engaging them around this issue isn't always as straightforward, as easy as you think, because they're dealing with historical injustices, historical pollutants, historical issues that kind of get intertwined into why they're in the base they're in with regard to septic. And so you can't really focus on one without incorporating the other, which makes an additional challenge. And I'm not sure if I answered your question on that, Elaine.
So yeah, when we're talking about communications and the types of populations that Sarah's just talking about, economically disadvantaged people who are facing a lot of challenges that affect their ability to comply with or think about much their wastewater, much less address it and remedy it. There's certainly financial constraints, but sometimes it's just a fundamental lack of awareness. So one thing that we like to do is to help local agencies or entities, whether that's a public health department or a nonprofit or a water system, develop the communications methods and tools so that they can go out and talk with their communities. And we can also be there. We can, go out and help and start those communications. And you can start building awareness just by, offering people kind of ways to think a little bit more, like, hey, are you aware that you need to keep fats, oils, and greases out of your system? And one way to do that is by using this strainer, and then offer those strainers as a free gift for people, just to get the conversation started.
That's fantastic. I appreciate all the information you guys have shared today. I also wanted to take just a second to point out that the Environmental Finance Center Network does have a resource hub specifically for on-site wastewater, which would be your septic tanks, your private lagoons, your small homeowner lagoons, cesspools, things like that. So if folks are looking for information that's out there, we do have a place where we're collecting resources and categorizing them and trying to make it your one-stop shop for information. So just wanted to share that resource is available. And, we're always adding to it and trying to keep it up to date and grow it. So if you know of resources that we're missing, we'd love to share them. Love to have you guys point us in the right direction. So Sarah, Elaine, any last thoughts for today?
Oh boy, just good luck to everyone who is trying to enforce rules around septic and trying to engage people around wastewater. It's a tough one. It's not a fun issue.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for your time today, Sarah and Elaine. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to your continued growth and education so that we can all benefit from it.
Thank you to all our listeners for tuning into this episode of the EFC Network Podcast, brought to you with support from the U.S. EPA. Be sure to stay tuned for future EFC Network podcast episodes.